Welcome to ChronoDrop Timeline, where history isn't just remembered, it's relived. In our first episode, we turn back the clock to a moment that reshaped Europe forever. April 20th, 1792, the start of a war born from revolution, fear, and unstoppable change. France was on fire. The monarchy had crumbled, the people had risen, and new ideas, liberty, equality, fraternity echoed through the streets. But across the borders, monarchs trembled. Would their own people rise next? On April 20th, 1792, the French Legislative Assembly declared war on Austria. What began as a single declaration would ignite over a decade of bloodshed across Europe. From the storming of the Tuileries to the guillotine's cold precision, from citizen soldiers to future Emperor Napoleon, this was not just a war. It was a turning point in history. The French Revolutionary Wars erupted on that fateful day in April, marking the beginning of a conflict that would reshape the political landscape of Europe. As the declaration of war echoed through the halls of power, few could have imagined the far-reaching consequences that would unfold over the next decade. But why did France truly fear Austria? Let's go deeper. Austria, under the rule of the Habsburg monarchy, was not just another European power. It was the heart of the Holy Roman Empire, a bastion of the old order that France's revolution threatened to overturn. The French revolutionaries saw in Austria a potential rallying point for counter-revolutionary forces, a fear that was not entirely unfounded. The spark that ignited this powder keg was the French Revolution itself. The radical ideas that had taken root in France's ideas of popular sovereignty, civil liberties, and the end of feudalism sent shockwaves across the continent. Monarchs watched with growing alarm as the French people dismantled centuries of tradition and royal authority. In the salons of Vienna, the courts of Berlin, and the palaces of St. Petersburg, rulers feared the contagion of revolution. They saw in France's upheaval a dire threat to their own power and the established order of Europe. The war that began on April 20th, 1792, was as much about preserving the status quo as it was about combating French aggression. As France declared war on Austria, other European powers soon joined the fray. Prussia, Russia, Great Britain, Spain, and several Italian states formed what became known as the First Coalition. This alliance of monarchies stood united against the revolutionary fervor emanating from Paris. But France was not merely fighting a defensive war. The revolutionaries saw their struggle as a crusade to spread the ideals of their revolution across Europe. Liberty, equality, fraternity was not just a slogan for domestic consumption, it was a battle cry meant to inspire oppressed peoples everywhere to rise up against their monarchs. The early years of the war saw France struggling against the combined might of Europe's great powers. Yet, how did a nation in the throes of internal turmoil manage to fend off invasion and even go on the offensive? The answer lies in the revolutionary fervor that gripped France. The Committee of Public Safety, led by the infamous Maximilien Robespierre, instituted a policy of mass conscription known as the en masse. Every able-bodied Frenchman became a soldier, every factory a supplier for the war effort. France transformed itself into a nation in arms, driven by patriotic zeal and revolutionary ideology. This new way of waging total war, mobilizing all of society's resources, would have profound implications for the future of warfare. The French Revolutionary Wars saw the birth of modern nationalism, where citizens fought not for a monarch, but for an idea, for a nation. As the conflict raged on, it became clear that this was no ordinary war. The battlefields of Europe became laboratories for new tactics and strategies. The old system of rigid, linear formations gave way to more flexible, mobile warfare. French commanders like Lazare Carnot and Louis Alexandre Berdier pioneered new approaches to military organization and logistics. But perhaps the most significant development to emerge from the chaos of the French Revolutionary Wars was the rise of a young artillery officer named Napoleon Bonaparte. His tactical brilliance first shone at the Siege of Toulon in 1793, where he commanded the Republican artillery against British-backed royalist forces. Napoleon's meteoric rise through the ranks was emblematic of the meritocracy that the revolution had ushered in. No longer was military command the exclusive preserve of the nobility. Talent, ambition, and results were what mattered now. As the 1790s wore on, the tide of war ebbed and flowed. France's armies pushed into the Low Countries, Italy, and even Egypt. With each campaign, Napoleon's reputation grew. His victories in Italy in 1796 and 1797 not only secured France's position, but also began to reshape the map of Europe. But what was the cost of this relentless expansion? How did the ideals of the revolution fare in the crucible of war? The revolutionary fervor that had propelled France to early victories began to wane. The idealism of 1789 gave way to pragmatism and, increasingly, to authoritarianism. The Directory, which had replaced the more radical revolutionary governments, struggled to maintain control at home while prosecuting the war abroad. It was in this atmosphere of uncertainty and fatigue that Napoleon seized power in the coup of 18 Brumaire. The French Revolutionary Wars had created the conditions for a military strongman to take control, promising stability and glory to a nation weary of constant upheaval. As the 18th century gave way to the 19th, the nature of the conflict began to change. Napoleon, now First Consul of France, sought to consolidate his power and bring the war to a conclusion. The Treaty of in 1801 and the Peace of Amiens in 1802 seemed to herald an end to the decade-long struggle. But the peace was short-lived. The French Revolutionary Wars had morphed into the Napoleonic Wars, a conflict that would consume Europe for another 12 years. The legacy of the French Revolutionary Wars is complex and far-reaching. They marked the end of the old European order, based on dynastic rights and balance of power politics. In their wake came the modern nation-state, national armies, and the concept of the citizen soldier. The wars also saw the birth of modern warfare. The sheer scale of the conflicts, the mobilization of entire societies, and the development of new tactics and technologies set the stage for the total wars of the 20th century. Politically, the French Revolutionary Wars spread the ideas of the revolution far beyond France's borders, even as the revolution itself was superseded by Napoleon's empire. The principles of liberty, equality, and national self-determination took root across Europe. These ideas would fuel the revolutions and national movements of the 19th century. The French Revolutionary Wars, begun on that spring day in 1792, were more than just a series of battles. They were the crucible in which modern Europe was forged. From the ashes of the old regime emerged a new order, one that would shape the course of history for centuries to come. As we close this episode of ChronoDrop Timeline, we're left to ponder the enduring impact of those turbulent years. The echoes of the French Revolutionary Wars can still be heard today, in our concepts of citizenship, in our national identities, and in the very structure of modern states. The war that began on April 20th, 1792, may have ended long ago, but its legacy lives on. It reminds us that history is not just a collection of dates and facts, but a living, breathing force that shapes our world in ways we're still discovering. Thank you for joining us on this journey through time. Until our next drop into history, remember, the past is never truly past. It's always with us, informing our present and shaping our future.